Good morning, church, and welcome to our Sunday service. I know this is a very unusual way of receiving a sermon or even worshiping, but given the state of the nation and the President's call for all of us to self-isolate, this is how we have to do things in the meantime. As the church, we are part of society and we're part of this community. And so as part of our responsibility and contribution to edify the human experience on this world, we are invited to also partake in things that edify the human experience and most importantly, uplift and make sure that every individual at this time and at this point in history is safe and protected. And so as we continue to learn new ways of doing church, new ways of working, teaching our kids from home, we are also invited to do faith and to practice our religion and to receive and worship in a very different way. And so to begin, I will share with you our gospel for this morning. Our gospel is found in the Gospel of John chapter 9, and it reads as follows. Jesus heard that they had thrown him out. And when he found him, he said, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" "Who is he, sir?" the men asked. "Tell me so that I may believe in him." Jesus said, "You have now seen him. In fact, he is the one speaking with you." Then the men said, "Lord, I believe," and he worshipped. Jesus said, "For judgment I have come into this world, so that the blind will see, and those who see will become blind." Some Pharisees who were with him heard him, and they asked, "What are we blind to?" And Jesus said, "If you were blind, you would not be guilty of sin. But now that you claim you can see, your guilt remains." This is the gospel of Christ. What is beautiful about the Gospel of John is that it shares a story of a man who was born blind, a man that lived in the shadows of society, a man that was excluded and was never really allowed to partake or to be part of certain practices that his community would have. And so this man encounters Christ, and Christ gives him a gift that he had not had access to for a very long time, and that was sight. And so this man begins to see. And as he begins to see the world differently, a world that he was deprived of for so long, the world comes to life in ways that he did not and could not ever imagine. But what is interesting in this gospel is that the Pharisees begin to ask questions about who healed this man. So instead of celebrating with him and being joyful that a man that was blind can see, the Pharisees were so caught up in trying to find out who healed him and whether this individual's power came from God or it came from the devil. And so they started asking a number of questions because in their minds, what had been performed, this miracle, was impossible. To give a man that was born blind sight, this was unheard of, and therefore the Pharisees saw it as an invitation to investigate and to find out who exactly dared to give sight to a man that was an outcast, that was blind and deprived of a vision and the ability to see the world. And so to begin our sermon, I just want to share the words that Christ shares in the Gospel of John also, where he says, "As you have sent me into the world, so I have sent them into the world." We subscribe to a faith that constantly invites us to go out of our comfort zone, out of routine, a faith that constantly challenges us to look at the world and relationships differently and anew every day. This is a faith that goes beyond boundaries that have been created by society. Our faith serves to remind us that we are called by love into love in order to love our neighbor, ourselves, and to love God. Now, if all of this makes sense, then understanding God's mission to humanity becomes even easier. As part of our Lenten journey, remember, we have a number of themes that we are focusing on. And today's theme is mission and prayer. And so if we look at God's mission for the world, we realize that it is a mission of love, a mission of inclusion, and a mission of rethinking society. We meet on Sunday as community to be fed and to be energized through teaching, through music, and just that sense of belonging, sitting in the pew and being reminded that you belong to something bigger than yourself. And once we have had our nourishment from the service, a beautiful part of the Anglican liturgy invites us to something very powerful. And the words say, "Go into the world to love and serve the Lord." And so every day, or every Sunday rather, we finish our service taking that statement with us as we walk out the door to love and serve God. This is our weekly invitation to mission, one that we cannot deny nor avoid. See, this reminder at the end of Mass does not invite us to go and judge the world. It does not invite us to go and assert our dominance and superiority. It does not tell us to go and Bible bash those who believe and think differently. Nor does it tell us to avoid the world, but it tells us to love this world. Our mission to the world is one of love, of service, of inclusion, of building bridges where society is torn and where gaps are seen and accepted to be normal. We live in difficult times where people are excluded and experience rejection at a very deep level, where some of us in society are so isolated that we constantly feel a deep sense of rejection, of hate, and not fitting in, because the world has created structures that remind us that we're not good enough. But this gospel of Christ is constantly pulling us back to say, you are good enough, you are worth it, and you are beautiful. And this for me is what is affirmed when this blind man is giving sight. He is reminded of his humanity, of his purpose, and his place in the world. And so we are constantly reminded as believers that our task is to be and to do exactly what Christ did. And so Christ constantly found time and made time rather to go out and minister to those who live in the shadows of society. And these are the individuals that we as believers are called to love and serve. Like the blind man that Jesus touched and healed, let us take this time of social distancing to look at the world anew, to look at public health and the values of society differently, and most importantly, to take time and appreciate the gift of life, of family, and the gift of solitude. We are so used to being busy and being distracted. We are so used to being caught up in things and systems and meetings and the busyness of life that being socially isolated or social distancing has become such an uncomfortable thing for us. We have to unlearn certain habits. We have to quieten down the noises in our lives. We have to find new ways of meeting without being in big crowds. We have to find new ways of dealing with the disruptions that keep us from spending time with ourselves, spending time with God and our close family members. Our mission to the world as believers right now is to take this moment of silence and social distancing to pray, to rethink, and to see how we can contribute positively to the building of a balanced society where we can manage not only our resources, but our time and our relationships, and create more spaces of true transformation, spaces of embracing that, spaces that are embracing, and spaces that constantly remind people that they belong and that they are worthy, regardless of what they think or believe. The purpose of human relationships is to edify the human experience, to give comfort in the midst of uncertainty, and to release that sense of distance as healing, and to realize that at this moment in time where we are being asked to socially distance ourselves, we are also being given an opportunity to heal. And so we are called and invited to this new realization that sometimes distance is the healing that society needs. Let us take this time of social distancing as an opportunity to pray for our world, to pray for the marginalized, for the dying, the poor, and those who struggle to find meaning in life. Let our prayers rise from the altars of our homes and fill the skies with freshness and our hearts with the hope that this too shall pass. And so I would like to end this session with a prayer from one of my favorite poets, Padraig O'Tuma, who says a prayer that is so deep and so refreshing yet so poetic. And in the words of the prayer itself, one finds a sense of peace, one acknowledges one's vulnerability, and one comes to the realization that there's always hope in the world, but it all depends on how we choose to look at things, at situations, and at each other. And so let us pick up the stones over which we stumble, friends, and build altars. Let us listen to the sound of breath in our bodies. Let us listen to the sound of our own voices, our own names, and our fears. Let us name the harsh light and soft darkness that surrounds us. Let us claw ourselves out from the graves we've dug. Let us lick the earth from our fingers. Let us look up, out, and around. The world is big and wide and wild and wonderful and wicked. And our lives are murky, magnificent, malleable, and full of meaning. Oremus, let us pray. And so, church, as we journey this week, let us be reminded that the Lenten journey is about silence. The Lenten journey is about a time to reflect and to draw ourselves closer to God, to our neighbor, and to ourselves. And if we say we love God and we love our neighbor, we will behave in society in a manner that protects and guards those relationships. And so I invite you all to dedicate your time in the next few weeks to pray for the world, to pray for yourselves and for your families, and to learn how to love God without boundaries. Because if we know how to love God without boundaries as God has loved us, it becomes even easier to love and appreciate those we are called into communion with. God bless you, God protect you, God guide you, and may God continue to work in and through you, and that you remain the light and hope in the world. Amen. Thank you.